Yes, ladies and gents. I, Jarek Defiler, have single-handedly defeated that epic RPG game industry killer, Baldur's Gate 3. And boy was it a fantastic romp. Bottle of lotion and Kleenex by my side, this game wowed me to no end, leaving my mouth agape in pleasure and my loins aching with the anticipation of just 5 more minutes. In fact, just thinking about it now is kind of making me a bit hot and bothered, because Baldur's Gate 3 is awesome. Granted, there are some criticisms I have, as no game is perfect, but these flaws are somewhat expected in a game of this size, or at the very least, probably more of an issue with me than the game. More on that later. For now, be sure to like, share, and subscribe to help out the channel. Now let us bask in the glory down by the river that is Baldur's Gate 3. Over the years, I have become somewhat of a Larian Studios fan. This is all due to my second favorite game of all time, Divinity Original Sin 2, Larian's magnus opus, a phenomenal CRPG that many would consider to be one of the best. Personally, I consider Divinity Original Sin 2 to be the best RPG I've ever played. But will Baldur's Gate 3 be the new magnum opus? Would that make them a magnum opus? Magnum opus? I don't know. Either way, my expectations were fairly high when delving into Baldur's Gate 3, and boy was I not disappointed. Big AAA studios just don't make games like this anymore. No hand-holding, no coddling the audience, instead treating them like adults, no shying away from rampant nudity, sex, gore, alcohol, drugs, and even some infanticide. Woo! Gotta hand it to them Belgians, man. They don't give a f***, and I love them for it. Baldur's Gate 3 is a wonder in the CRPG universe. Fantastic writing, excellent voice acting, superb interweaving plots and storylines, awesome characters, and some combat that many might like or hate depending on the player. Again, more on that later. This time is meant for gushing. I want to have sex with Baldur's Gate 3. Anywho, right out of the gate, the game throws you into this fantastical world, Faerun of Dungeons & Dragons infamy. For those who don't know, the Baldur's Gate 3 series is the computer version of Dungeons & Dragons RPGs, with Baldur's Gate 3 being based off the 5th edition. But you don't have to be familiar with D&D to enjoy the game. I, for one, know little to nothing about Dungeons & Dragons, and I didn't feel it hindered me all that much. There are some things I had to look up to understand that most D&D gurus would know, but it wasn't that big a deal. Granted, I have played Baldur's Gate 2, Shadows of I don't remember, and Throne of Bhaal many moons ago, but in all honesty, I barely recall what they entailed, so know that newcomers to the franchise are more than welcome here and shouldn't have too much trouble getting their feet wet. That said, Baldur's Gate 3 is not really one for casual RPG gamers. However, there are 3 difficulty settings for mostly every player out there. Mostly. Explorer, Balanced, and Tactician. Explorer is the story mode where you get bonuses on dice rolls and checks, tougher allies, and I believe even a discount at traders. This is a good starting mode for beginners. Balanced mode is just that, balanced, basically the normal mode. This is also the difficulty that I played in. It's tough but fair. You will find yourself having some failures on dice rolls and proficiency checks, but that's part of the fun sometimes, as it can lead to interesting outcomes. I recommend this mode for veteran CRPG gamers. Lastly, we have Tactician. This is for the hardcore gamers. Tough fights, tough dice rolls, smarter enemy AI with enhanced equipment and abilities. This is not for everyone. I found myself struggling at times in balanced mode. Tactician is a whole nother beast for a rare breed of gamer. One who puts tactics and strategy above all else, perhaps with spreadsheets and equipment descriptions on their second monitor. I'm too scared to play this mode as I think it would result in me hating the game. Moving on, at the start you have the option to create your own custom character. The Baldur's Gate 3 community have deemed Tav. Or you can play one of the 7 origin characters. Astarion, our rogue, Lae'zel, the fighter, who is my personal favorite, Gale, the wizard, the cleric Shadowheart, Wyll, the warlock, our barbarian Karlach, and the intriguing Dark Urge. Not for the faint of heart, that one. In my playthrough, which all the footage of this video is taken from, you see that I played a custom slate wizard, Deacon, my standard spellcrafting character in all RPGs. I'm sure, just like in Divinity Original Sin 2, that there's probably more to gain from a narrative standpoint by playing an origin character, but I always go custom on my first playthrough, and this was no different. All in all, the custom character experience was fantastic. It starts off with absolutely phenomenal character customization options. It took me roughly an hour and a half to create my character and my guardian character, who is an NPC in the game that becomes integral in your narrative. This is a very good thing. I personally love customizing characters in RPGs and playing dress up a bit with them. I mean, they have like dozens of different hairstyles to choose from. It's loads of fun and Baldur's Gate 3 has it in spades, but keep in mind that it's just an option. So for those of you out there that could care less about character customization, you can just skip it all and go with the default or random options. No biggie. You have the option to play one of 11 races, as well as multiple sub-races for each of those base races, and then 12 options for your actual character class, ranging from warlocks to barbarians. On top of that, you also have 11 options for your character's background, adding proficiency bonuses depending on what you choose. There is something for everyone here, and it's glorious. I went with a gaudy tiefling wizard myself, as I tend to make my characters kind of weird looking. Fair warning before moving on, there may be a spoiler or two here, but mostly I'll try to keep commentary on the story to a minimum, as that is the driving force behind Baldur's Gate 3. Instead, I'll try to focus more on the actual gameplay mechanics and perhaps the characters, because they are a big part of the experience. That said, the story is, in my opinion, very solid. Larian Studios tends to have fantastic writing in their games, not just with the stories but also the dialogue and in-game literature, which there is an abundance of. Lots and lots of reading in this game, which is part of the reason why it took me 200 hours to do one playthrough. Well, maybe more like 170 hours, because I do tend to leave my computer games running while I'm AFK doing other things. But the story is presented here in Larian Studios' signature non-linear way, where there is always another option when it comes to moving forward. There are multiple branching storylines that intersect and weave in and out of each other, as well as splitting into multiple possible outcomes depending on the choices you make as the player, or even the route you take when getting to your destination. For instance, you can often find a way into a locked environment through multiple means. You might be able to talk your way in with persuasive or intimidating tactics, you could sneak your way in, lockpicking a back door or something, sometimes you can use your perception and find hidden entrances like a pipe or broken window, or you could just go the Rambo route and smash your way in, killing everything in sight. This is very common in Baldur's Gate 3 and makes traversing the world all the more fun. Options, options, options. Now, I didn't want to do a video on the game until I completed at least one full playthrough, so that 200 hours involved an impressively great deal of reading, talking to NPCs, watching cutscenes, and just scouring every nook and cranny of every environment and biome. When it comes to RPGs, especially CRPGs, I am very much an explorer type, so I tend to not leave an area until I completed or explored every single inch of it. I did that in Baldur's Gate 3, and it resulted in that 150 plus hour game time. And the thing is, I still missed a few things. There was one or two quests that I couldn't complete because I just didn't figure them out, or I simply missed something in their given area. This is a very good thing in my opinion. The replayability here is insane. There is so much to see and do, and the world and levels are so beautifully handcrafted that, just like in Divinity Original Sin 2, I have no doubt that every new playthrough will find you discovering something new. Larian is fantastic at this, and I feel they've really nailed it here. I'm already a good 7 hours into my second Evil Dark Urge playthrough, and I've seen so much new stuff that it's like I'm playing a completely different game. Kudos. So for you lore and role-playing nerds out there, you won't be disappointed. The vast number of books and letters to read, as well as non-essential NPCs to talk to, will have your narrative itch scratched to no end. There is so much dialogue and conversations to have with the various characters and NPCs in the game, and it's all voice acted. On top of that, every time you talk to an NPC, it's basically a cutscene. You go from top-down point of view to third person. This is why it's actually worth customizing your character, unlike games like Skyrim where you spend all this time crafting your face, only to have it covered by a helmet the entire game. In Baldur's Gate 3, you can choose to hide your helmet during dialogue or just entirely, thus making your striking visage a staple in every conversation. But the beauty about this point of view is that it generally doesn't lock your other characters out of play, so while in dialogue you can simply click the options at the bottom and select another character, allowing them to run around while the NPC is distracted and pickpocket or steal all their goods if they want. Perfectly legitimate strategy. The sheer amount of work they had to put into this is insane, as every NPC is different. Sure, you'll see a lot of the same face types, but I suspect that's probably due to having lip-syncing physics on all the NPCs, thus needing a default structure to allow for proper syncing, my opinion anyways. But even then, there is still a hefty amount of variety in the NPCs. Not only that, there is a ton of them. When you get to a town or the city, it feels like an actual city. The streets are busy, littered with vendors and NPCs having various conversations, none of which are the same. If I walk around the docks, they're talking about something completely different than if I'm walking around a temple or the market. There is no generic dialogue here. Everything is unique. Larian did such a good job here. My thing is always immersion. I love playing RPGs because I love being immersed into these fantastical worlds of aliens or elves and orcs or dragons and space stations. I love forging relationships with NPCs and taking part in faction politics or what have you. And Baldur's Gate 3 scratches that itch like no Mind Flayer's business. I found myself getting completely sucked into the world of Faerun, feeling compassion for some characters, disgust for others, wanting to help innocents or punish evildoers, on my first playthrough at least. Those like me will find themselves more than satisfied when it comes to lore and immersion in Baldur's Gate 3. Truly excellent work here from Larian Studios. The characters alone are worth playing for, to be honest. As mentioned before, Lae'zel was my favorite and my romance option, as how could I pick anyone else?
Taste.
She is a goddess. A Githyanki warrior, she strives to ascend to a powerful elite champion of her people's queen, and she'll crush anyone in her way to achieve that goal. But as the game progresses, you see her goals shift, change, and sometimes even conflict. Like all the other characters, new things come to light that cause her to look at her journey with a new perspective. Same can be said for Shadowheart, a dark cleric on a mission for her dark mother, a goddess of night. And as the game progresses, Shadowheart discovers much about her faith and past that was kept hidden from her, bringing about much inner conflict and eventually some drastic choices on how she must proceed. Each companion has their own problems, likes, dislikes, loves, and hatreds that make them pretty authentic and just a treat to interact with. There wasn't a single character in Baldur's Gate 3 that I thought was badly written or executed. Sure, I like some over others, but I have no doubt that other gamers' favorites will be my least favorites, and vice versa. Each to their own, you know? But I don't think that any of the characters are bad. I think they are all interesting and unique in their own way, and the fact that you can kill them off or maim them is all the more interesting. Larian Studios doesn't hold back when it comes to whacking major characters, and you can take people out in a variety of different ways. Bit of a spoiler here, but I have never felt more heartbroken from playing a game than when I allowed Shadowheart to assassinate my Lae'zel in her sleep. Just, ugh. Which leads me to my next topic, save scumming. Do it. A lot. All the time. There is no shame here because you are going to be wanting to see all the different alternatives and routes when it comes to traversing this magical world. By the end of my first playthrough, I had 2,360 quick saves, and I regret nothing. I found myself quick saving at the end of every single interaction. I was taking no chances. That said, there is something to say about failure in this game. Sometimes you want to let it happen, as failure allows for some pretty interesting outcomes, mainly in dialogue options. You just have to find it for yourself. For instance, a failure may cause someone to attack or insult you where if you succeeded, those experiences wouldn't have happened. Failures can be fun sometimes, but I still recommend save scumming anyways because you just never know what might happen. Okay, but what about the actual gameplay? How does Baldur's Gate 3 fare when it comes to mechanics and combat? Well, for the most part, pretty damn good. You'll never get bored with his over 200 plus spells and then more melee and ranged weapon attacks on top of that, but there is one glaring issue that might turn a lot of people off when they first dip into the game, and that is the fact that everything, and I mean everything, is based on 20-sided dice rolls. You're walking in the mountains and come across your survival or nature check, dice roll. You're trying to persuade a guard to let you go when you walked into an off-limits area, dice roll. You're downed in combat and waiting each turn for someone to revive you on your team, trying to avoid death, dice roll. You're taking a shit in the forest and struggling with your zipper, dice roll. You're walking in the road and a pothole comes up trying to trip you, dice roll. You're f***ing picking your nose, dice roll. Everything's a f***ing dice roll. And you better damn well be ready to see lots and lots of this. Holy balls of Alcatraz, the dice rolls are real, ladies and gentlemen, and it can be infuriating. I haven't spat this many expletives at my computer screen since my old League of Legends or Heroes of the Storm days. You will remember those times when you miss an 86% chance to hit a target 3 times in a row. You'll fume at those 96% chance to hit critical misses. You'll froth at the mouth at those saving throws your opponent gets over and over when walking in your nasty black tentacles or ignoring your blind and fear abilities. You will rage. But you'll also forget about the times Lae'zel chain crit a Mind Flayer 4 times in a row, turning them into a bowl of sweaty chili in just one turn. You'll forget those critical successes on a dialogue option with a 30 difficulty class, the difficulty class being the number required to pass the check. All those easy peasy high-end lockpicks and trap disarmings will be nothing more than a flutter in the wind because you got a critical failure on a 2-cost difficulty class for deceiving a child. This is the mindset of gamers, unfortunately, and I am just as guilty. The failures are what get ya, the successes be damned. But all that said and done, Larian Studios was very clear that Baldur's Gate 3 was a tried and true representation of Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, which means dice rolls. Personally, I don't care for it that much. I much rather prefer the skill and accuracy checks of Divinity Original Sin 2. When you have a dungeon master that can control the flow of things and intervene when necessary, dice rolls are perfectly fine. But in a computer setting that most likely is being played single player, dice rolls don't really translate that well in my opinion. You tend to need to give the advantage to the player. But here's the thing, in the game's defense, you can get the advantage. You can build your characters and your party to be tailored to pass certain checks. I tend to like to go heavy in persuasion or deception personally. I enjoy the talking aspect of these games for my custom characters more than anything, so I'm pretty good when it comes to dialogue checks. But then I would build Astarion to be a master rogue, lockpicking and disarming traps like no man's business. He couldn't hit a shot with his bow to save his life though. Lae'zel was my go-to fighter, so I crafted her to be a heavily armored behemoth with max 20 strength that would often get up to 27 with elixirs, basically making her invincible and the deadliest character in the game. Because remember, everything is a dice roll, so that 20 strength gives a hefty modifier bonus. Thus, in big fights with a dozen or more enemies, I would just send my girl Lae'zel off by herself to handle one side of the fight, while the rest of the party struggles with one or two guys. By the time we got ours down, Lae'zel had wiped out the rest of the army and was already sitting on her throne of skulls. But she wouldn't have been like that if I didn't make her as such. So you can build your characters to be absolute powerhouses. It will take time, but if you know what you're doing, you can get it done. However, a lot of people might not know what they're doing. If that's the case, I recommend maybe starting off with the Explorer difficulty to get that dice roll bonus if you're new to dice roll mechanics in CRPGs. At the end of the day, the dice rolls are fairly annoying in my opinion, but still fair. Those are simply the rules of D&D, and they've worked for decades. Despite them not translating too well to a computer game, I still think they're perfectly fine. Just be sure to save scum if you're not happy with an outcome. After all, gaming should be about having fun, and save scumming is a way to guarantee things go the way you want as the player. No shame, just know what you're getting into before you buy. Still, I wish they probably wouldn't have put a percentage chance on attacks, because a lot of the time those are just bunk, because at the end of the day it all comes down to the dice rolls, and those percentages can be deceptive with false hope. The rest of my criticism for Baldur's Gate 3 is mostly technical. This is a huge game with lots of moving parts and elements that a simpleton smooth brain like myself can barely comprehend, so I'm pretty lax when it comes to bugs, graphical glitches, and the occasional crash or whatnot. And Baldur's Gate 3 has them in abundance. The camera can get really janky at times, often blocking my view when going into certain parts of caves or dungeons, sometimes locking up, and if you start a dialogue with an NPC, the camera may place itself where something is blocking the view between you, which is fairly annoying. Lip syncing is, for the most part, not that bad. However, there were several instances where it would desync, the characters wouldn't move their mouths at all.
My blood! It's burning! Sizzling! Do you feel it? Don't come too close.
Or sometimes a character's voice would change, as if they had two different voice actors or something. Also, the audio and the voice acting in some spots, mainly the first act, were very off. Like at some points it would sound like the voice actor was in an open room with echoes rather than a studio booth.
I saw you on the ship, strutting about whilst I was trapped in that pod. What did you and those tentacled freaks do to me?
The volume levels would vary from character to character, being loud for some, quiet for others. Not a deal breaker, but it was somewhat off-putting and immersion breaking. Occasionally, if an enemy died on top of another enemy or body, then I wouldn't be able to select said enemy because the hitboxes would be unclickable. Even alt-clicking didn't work, so that was a bit of a pain as I couldn't loot some hefty characters and would have to reload or just leave them. At times, you have to be on your guard when walking with your party, because if you are around a bunch of traps and trying to disarm them, your other party members may get a mind of their own and just walk randomly into one of the traps even though you all know they're there. This is easily solved by just disconnecting your trap disarmer from the party and have them fixing everything solo, but I did have many unhappy accidents with my party members' AI just wandering into traps or acid and fire pools for no reason. This is also a problem when you are fighting with allies. The AI sometimes isn't that great and they will intentionally put themselves in harm's way. One fight in particular found my ranged allies teleporting right next to very powerful melee enemies despite them having the safety of range. Very annoying, very much save scumming. I found myself having quite a few crashes the more the game progressed. Part of this was apparently due to Vulkan having some conflicts with OBS, my recording software, but other times I wouldn't have OBS running and the game would crash regardless. It would leave an error prompt that I could only see in the taskbar, as the game would commandeer my screen and not allow me to see the message. After scouring the internet for a solution, it seems that many others were having the same problems with crashing as well. That said, I maybe crashed like a dozen times over my 200 hours of gameplay, so in the grand scheme of things, it wasn't that bad or frequent. Again, just remember to spam F5 for that quick save because you never know. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. I'll end the video here. Just wanted to give my broad overall praise of Baldur's Gate 3. I think it's a phenomenal game worth any RPG fan's time. It has its issues, but I don't think those involve the actual gameplay, mechanics, or story. The issues tend to be technical and most likely stuff that they'll patch over the months, hopefully. The characters are great, the story is engaging, the world and lore is the most fascinating aspect in my opinion, the immersion is top notch, and the replayability is in the thousands of playtime hours. So many different paths you can take, so many dialogue options, not just in the main story, but a plethora of side quests as well. There's so many different builds and spells you can try out that you can play over and over again and always have something new. The world feels alive and unique, and I really love how they treat me like an adult and don't shy away from darker, more mature themes and content. I can't comment on how Baldur's Gate 3 holds up to Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, but I get the feeling that it is very Dungeons & Dragon-y with what little experience I have in the franchise anyways. So I highly recommend you guys give it a go. Baldur's Gate 3 has set the bar for story-driven RPGs, and I hope other studios are quaking in their boots at the thought of having to compete. This is a very good thing for the industry in my opinion, as now big AAA studios may feel the need to step up their game when it comes to RPGs. No more generic quest lines or boring characters, give us something with substance. Larian Studios proved that it can be done, and the success of this game wildly passed their expectations, so I don't see why some of these multi-billion-dollar studios can't oblige as well. Thanks for watching, ladies and gents. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe if you'd be so kind. Hit that notification bell for notification on future videos. And like I always do on my opinion videos, here's a snippet from the game's amazing soundtrack, composed by the great Borislav Slavov. If I'm saying that correctly. This particular track really stuck out to me, giving me goosebumps when I first heard it in-game. Somewhat of a spoiler here, it's entitled Raphael's Final Act. Enjoy. This has been Jarek Defiler, love of Lae'zel, savior of Baldur, the patient gamer. You all have a good morning, afternoon, evening, or night depending on where you are. Take it easy.
Life's all mortal lives expire. Souls go to their dooms in flame forevermore.
Fools, how hard you have fought. Brave, but it's all been for naught. True souls that couldn't be bought, doomed, detected, and caught. No more deals, it's over. The final act, you're doomed. No more grace, it's over. This house of hope. You're